Hi everyone, and welcome to your tutorial on how to knot your beautiful pearls. My name is Fleur Hastings and I'm from a business called Relax and Craft, where we love to teach you how to make beautiful jewellery in lots of different techniques and jewellery mediums. But today we're going to concentrate on pearl knotting, what you're going to need to pearl knot and how to actually make your beautiful strands of pearls into gorgeous wearable jewellery. So to get started, I'm just going to go through a few of the reasons of why we knot our pearls. So you can knot gemstones or pearls, it doesn't matter what you're knotting, but the reason why we do knot them is firstly to keep the pearls separated from each other. So pearls, as we know, have this beautiful outer coating called a nacre, and we don't really want our pearls to rub against each other and damage that nacre, especially if we've got expensive pearls like Edison pearls, Accoya pearls, South Sea pearls, and the such. So they're knotted to keep each other away, to keep them away from each other, so that they don't get damaged. They're also knotted as well to showcase each pearl's individual natural beauty. So you can see each pearl is given its own little showcase with a knot on either side to really highlight how beautiful that specific pearl is. And lastly, it's because they have got this beautiful drape when they have been knotted. So when we knot pearls onto silk or onto power nylon, we have this beautiful drape, which means when it's worn, it moves with the body and the orient of the pearls catches the light in all different angles. So it's not static like it would be on a piece of wire or onto some beading thread. This is a real beautiful fluid way of wearing your pearls. So they're the reasons why we knot them. It is a little bit of an art form to knot them. There's lots of different ways to knot them. I'm going to go through 3 of the main ways today, which I like to do. It may be something that you just need to practice at a little bit. So some people are just naturals and just get it straight away. Some people will need just a few times to sort of like hone the skills. But because we're doing 3 different ways as well, I'm hoping that one of those 3 ways will resonate with you and will become your go-to for knotting your pearls. So the tools that we're going to need are, we're going to need a knotting awl. So this is a smooth pointed sort of like metal pin, if you like, a little bit wider than a metal pin with a nice ergonomic handle on the end. I like these ones because it feels nicer in your hand rather than the thin plastic ones or the sort of like the long thin pin macrame ones. So I prefer these ones to work with because, like I say, I find that they're a lot easier to handle, and also I can see it a lot better when I pop it down and it doesn't get lost on my crafting table or on my jewellery bench. The other one that we're going to use are some tweezers. Now these are beading tweezers, which means that they have got a very nice fine point on the end of our tweezers. So you can see there that really nice fine point. We've got smooth jaws in between, and it's very important that the jaws are smooth in between. We don't want to use tweezers that are used for picking up gemstones or diamonds because they have ridges on the inside to help you grip those gemstones. These are beautifully smooth so that we don't snag our thread when we're working with it. The other thing that we're going to use, especially when we're using our knotting awl, is some sort of like EVA dense foam. So something like a macrame board, a kumihimo board, something like that would be really helpful because we're going to stick this into our board and it's going to stay solid but not come through the other side. And also it doesn't matter if it is your one and only macrame board or kumihimo board, it's only a couple of little holes that are going in there. It doesn't detract from what it's going to be used for. But I've just got these discs of EVA that I tend to use so that they're a little bit more compact for if I'm making a craft event or something like that. It's a little bit smaller for me to take. The other things that you are going to need for one of the techniques is some sort of bead stopper, or you can knot the end of the thread, but that means we're going to have to cut the thread behind the knot. So one of these little bead stoppers is absolutely perfect, and this is going to hold your cord for you nice and still, and none of your pearls are going to fall off the end when we've knotted them, and that's for our double-stranded technique. Other things that we're going to need are some sort of very sharp scissors or cord pliers, something like this, so they've got a real nice sharp cutting tip right to the very end. So these are the Zuron thread and cord cutters that I've got there. I've got my 4-in-1 crimping pliers just to help me close the culottes and the crimp covers when I'm using those. These are really, really handy for that. And then just a basic toolkit, which is my round nose pliers and 2 pairs of chain, flat or bent nose pliers, whichever ones you have, for your jewellery making. And if you do have one, but it's not an essential, a thread zapper is sort of like a good tool to be able to use, especially if you're using the power nylon. This can't be used for if you're using your silks. And the last thing is our jewellery glue, and we'll get onto the jewellery glue when we're using it in the actual demo. So moving on to our findings, there's lots of different ways that you can finish your pearl knotted jewellery. There are things like your culottes and your wire guardians and your French wire. All these do is protect the thread that you're using from the finding that you're using. So obviously when you've got metal findings and then you've got a cord, it's a good idea just to protect that cord from the metal, because through wear and tear it will start to fray. So the 3 findings that we're going to use today in the different techniques are going to just help to protect that thread from the actual finding itself. So the first one that we're going to quickly look at is our culottes. So culottes or clamshells, depending on which name you know them as, these are like an all-in-one bead tip, if you like. Let me just try and get them to focus. I might have to just move this out of the way, and then this should focus for me. Let me just bring that over there so it's got something to focus on. So this is like a crimp cover with a hole underneath. Let's just zoom in so you can see it a little bit easier, if it's going to focus for me. Come on. It will focus in a minute. So what this is going to do, it's going to house, there we go. It's going to house the knot in between, inside this little cup here, and then close up to create a really nice, neat end to your pieces. So what that's going to look like when it's actually made into a piece is like this. So you can see the first and last knot are just inside there, and that is the only finding that we're going to use, other than our clasp and our either this one's got an extension chain on there, but you're clasping your jump ring to attach to. So this is just a single finding all by itself. We don't need anything else because everything is housed just within there, and then you've got that little loop at the top that you fold over to be able to facilitate your clasp and your jump ring, or your extension chain, whichever one you're using. So these are your culottes. The next one is your wire guardians. So this is like a little, I always think they're like little headphones. So it's like a little horseshoe, and what they have is they've got 2 holes at the top, or at the bottom should I say. So you can see there's 2 holes just there, and what happens with these is you bead up through one side with put your needle up through one side along the top, and the top is a ridge, and I'll just bring that into focus for you. So it's just a little ridge, so your cord sits within that little ridge and comes out down through the bottom of the opposite hole. And what these look like when they're in situ is this. So you can see the red cord that I've used here to knot the pearls is just sitting in that little groove there, and it's now protecting the cord from wear and tear of the clasp. Now with this kind of finding, we do need to use a crimp cover just to cover the first knot, and I also use a small bead to facilitate going through the first and last bead twice. So it's a really nice ending to your piece, and if you're using coloured thread you can still see that little colour there. And the last one that we're going to use is our French wire. So this is a coil of very, very fine wire, and again this is, you can get this in different diameters. This one will facilitate up to 1 millimeter cord going through, and what we do is we just chop a little tiny bit, so less than a centimeter off. We chop that off of the coil, off of the length, and we use literally less than a centimetre on either side. And what that looks like when it's finished is this. So you can see, if I just bring this, so you can see there, it's just here. So this is the little coil, and it's just a tiny little bit, and it's just going over that end bit of cord. And again, like as in the previous finding, we're going to use a crimp cover and a bead just to facilitate the first and last bead going through twice, and also covering the very first knot. But that's the 3 different endings that we're going to use in the different techniques. So you can choose one that you like the look of more, or it may be that one fits a project that you're working on better than another one, but it's great to know how to use them all so you've got options. Other things that we're going to be using are, like I said, your crimp covers. So these are little half beads, if you like, that when they are closed together look like a full bead. And what I tend to do is I tend to use the same size crimp cover as I do bead. So I've got 3mm beads and I've got 3mm crimp covers, so that you can't see the difference between the two once the crimp cover is closed over. The other thing that we're going to be needing are some clasps, so whichever clasp of your choice. Now if you're using something like a toggle clasp, then you do need to make sure that the pearls that you're using won't hinder the toggle clasp being done up. But when we start to make, I always tend to go to a jump ring rather than straight onto the clasp. That means that we can change anything if we need to, and we don't have to re-knot everything, but I'll go into more detail in that when we start the knotting. I've got some jump rings just to, again, jump the gap, which is why they're called jump rings, between what you've made and the finding. So between the pearl knotted piece and the clasp are little jump rings. Now you don't need very big jump rings, these are quite small, they're about 3mm jump ring. And then lastly, if you wanted to, you can use something like an extender chain, just so that somebody can extend the length or make the length of the pearl piece that they're wearing slightly different to accommodate more different styles. So the other thing which is very important when we are pearl knotting is the thread that we're going to use. Now there are 2 different kinds of thread which are sort of like the main threads, if you like. You can get thread on a reel that you can knot with, but that can be quite difficult to start with. So I always suggest that people start with either the power nylon, which I find is a very forgiving cord because it's nylon, it doesn't stretch, or the natural silk. So both of these products are from a company called Griffin, and they are the leading sort of like manufacturer of beading thread with the needle already attached. So what's so fantastic about these is the needle is already on the silk itself, so we don't have to thread any needles, and we don't have to worry about sort of like trying to get the correct diameter needle to go through the pearls. On each card with Griffin you get 2 meters, so that's plenty to do your project, and if you have a few little mishaps to start with, you've still got plenty to carry on with. So there's a few different things about the cards. The first thing, as we say, is they have the needle already attached. So the needle is the same diameter as the cord that we're using. And I'm just going to again bring that white background over just so you can see. So you can see there that the needle is the same diameter as the cord. If you are using cord and adding your own needle, you need to make sure that the needle will go through the pearl or the bead that you're using, plus double the amount of cord that you're using, because as we know, as it goes through the eye of the needle, it's doubled over, so you've got a tail and the working strand. So you do need to make sure that you can get both of those through your sort of like beads or your pearls. Two differences with the power nylon and the silk is a natural fibre and will stretch over time and can disintegrate over time. Power nylon is a non-stretch material, so it's great to learn with. Really, really fantastic product this. It's not going to stretch over time. You're not going to have to restring your pearls every 2 to 3 years like you would do on natural silk, and that is dependent on how you store your pearls and also how heavy the pearls are. If they're big pearls and they're on natural silk, they're going to stretch quite quickly because of the weight of the pearl on the silk. So that's something to bear in mind if you're using natural silk and power nylon. Natural silk is obviously the most traditional way of knotting pearls, but power nylon, in my opinion, has the upper hand because it doesn't stretch, and it is a lot more forgiving. If you do put a knot in the wrong place, you can tend to just open that knot up and slide it to where you want it to be. Whereas natural silk, if you start to fray that silk, it's going to snap on you at some point. So they're the two. The card systems work exactly the same, whether it's natural silk and power nylon. So I'm going to go through that with you now. So each card has some numbers at the top. So you can see here that it's got 2 meters of cord. So there's 2 meters worth of cord. And then we've got this one here, which is the number 5. So number 5 denotes the smallest pearl that you technically can use with this cord. Now, different pearl manufacturers or drillers will drill with different size drill bits. They mainly drill with a 0.6 drill, but sometimes if they're very, very small pearls or they are hand drilled as and when that you need them, or you're drilling your own pearls, you may use a different different drill bit. So the different numbers denote the size of the pearl that we're going to use with. The other thing as well, so you can see here, this is a number 2 card. So this card we use for all of our single pearl knots. So there's 3 different techniques that we're going to use. Like I said, the double technique, which is called the baroque knotting, the knotting awl and the tweezers. So with the knotting awl and tweezers, we use just one cord going through the pearls to secure the knot going through. With the double strand technique, we don't use any tools at all, but we do need to make sure that the silk goes through, or the cord goes through twice. So the 0.45 is a thin enough material to go through most of your pearls twice and create a knot that stays on the outside of the bead. Whereas when we're using the single ones, we want just a 0.6, 0.7 cord to be able to go through and for the knot to stay on the outside of the bead. So that sounds quite sort of like easy, but if you've got slightly bigger drill holes, and I've used this red one here so that you can see the red cord, we can see each knot there is sitting on the outside of each bead. Like we say, that those knots are there to protect the beads to protect the pearls from each other, and also to showcase the beauty and to give them that natural drape. If the material that you're using is too small, that knot will go inside the pearl and you won't see the knot. So you need to make sure that the knot stays on the outside. So it's a great idea to have different card numbers just to sort of like make sure that you've got all your bases covered. But as a general rule of thumb, I use card number 5 and 6 for all my single knot pearl projects, and card number 2 for all my double pearl knot projects. So when I'm doing my baroque knotting and going through twice, this is the one that I use. When I'm using my knotting awl or my tweezers, I tend to use number 5 or number 6. Now these come in an array of different colours, so you can match your pearls to your colours of your cords, or you could completely contrast it. So you could go kind of monochrome. You could have a black cord with a white pearl, which looks absolutely beautiful, very designer. Or you could add a pop of colour, as I have here, with your red cord, and I've teamed that with some red garnet in between as a center section for this necklace, for this bracelet, sorry. But you can see those red knots really stand out. So that's our threads. What I would always say as well, I'll show you how to take this off of the card. When we're using just a single knot, a single strand going through in the knot, you tend to have enough to do at least a necklace or a bracelet on these cards as well. When we're doing the double knotting, we tend to use probably 1 card per necklace or 1 card for 2 bracelets. So we're always going to need double the amount for these ones and double plus a little bit more for the single knotting. So the last thing that I want to talk about before we get on to knotting is the lengths of pearls. So traditionally pearls have been worn at different lengths, and they all have different names. So if I just keep that one in shot while I just read out the actual names and lengths of the pearls that have been used through history and their names. So the first one that we talk about, the shortest pearl strand, is a collar, and that is basically 14 inches of pearls or your neck size. Okay, so whichever one you want to work with. So if you're making it specifically for a person and they want a collar of pearls which sits right at the very base, the top of the neck, sort of like where the head and the neck join, where your collar would normally go, that is going to sit right there. So 14 inches or your neck size. The next one is a choker. So that is a 16-inch necklace. So it will sit just underneath the sort of like where your collarbones are, just above the collarbones, sitting right at the sort of like the nape of your neck, right at the end of your neck. So that is a 16-inch necklace or your neck size plus 5 centimeters. Next one, we go on to probably the most well-known size of pearl necklaces, which is the princess length. So that is an 18-inch necklace and sits just underneath the collarbones. It's said to be the most beautifully worn length of pearls because as you move your body, your pearl orients will catch the light and dazzle everybody. So the princess length is 18 inches or your neck size plus 10 centimeters. So again, depending on your neck size, if you don't want to do the sort of like traditional lengths, you know what kind of how many centimeters to add to your neck size to then create that beautiful princess drape. The next one is our matinee necklace. So that is a 20-inch necklace or your neck size plus 25, and that is a beautiful mid-décolletage kind of length, really nice for high-necked pieces or for plunging necklines. And after that is our opera length, which is 24 inches or your neck size plus 55 centimeters. And I'll go through these really quickly at the end as well, just in case you want to jot them down. So a really nice mid-chest length is your opera length. And the last one that we talk about is a rope of pearls, which is 30 inches or your neck size plus 100 centimeters. So a really beautiful opulent length. And again, these last three, the matinee, the opera and the rope, tended to be used to show wealth in a person as well, because that's how many pearls that you had. You can afford to have a rope of pearls. So a very, very beautiful length of pearls, which can also be doubled up into a choker and a princess as well if you wanted to use them both together. So 30 inches plus, you can have sort of like those two different lengths. You could have a double rowed set of pearls. Obviously there's different kinds of pearl jewellery. You can have double row pearls, triple row pearls as well. So there's lots of different styles of jewellery, but they are the lengths that we tend to use for our pearls. So I'll just quickly go through them again. So your choker is 14 inches or your neck size. Your collar is 14 inches or your neck size. Your choker is 16 inches or your neck size plus 5 centimeters. Your princess is 18 inches or your neck size plus 10 centimeters. Matinee is 20 inches or your neck size plus 25 centimeters. Opera is 24 inches plus or your neck size plus 55 centimeters. And your rope is 30 inches plus or your neck size plus 100 centimeters. So they're the kind of traditional lengths that we tend to talk about with pearl necklaces. But as we know, as jewellery makers, we can make them whatever size we want. So please don't be just sort of like dictated to by those sizes. Make them whatever size that you want. And also, obviously, if you wanted to add some chain in there or make station necklaces or even some gemstones as well, you can do. So let's get into the knotting. So the first thing we want to look at when we're looking at our pearls to knot is we want to actually look at the strand that we're going to knot. So if I take this one, for example, which is a strand of nugget pearls, you can see that they're all different shapes and sizes, which going on to your strand have just been stranded for the length that needed to be sold. So it's not sort of like the best pearls are in the middle and the lesser quality are at the end, or if there are any lesser quality on there, or the different shapes. You may have a beautiful perfect drop pearl up here and then a gorgeous near round over here. So the first thing we want to look at is where are our, if you like, our hero pearls. So where are our beautiful pearls that we want in the center of our necklace? We want to stand out the most. So just get in the habit of just looking at your pearls and looking for like a beautiful pearl. So if I look at this one here, this one has got such a gorgeous metallic luster to it that I would love that one near the front of my necklace. But if I was just going to knot and just take them off individually as they come off the strand, it'd be such a shame if this one was the very first one next to the clasp at the back, unless you're having the clasp at the front for a feature. But so just get used to having a look through them all and just seeing if there are any gorgeous pearls that you want right at the very front that are maybe hiding at the back or the end of your strands. So again, this is a strand of beautiful Accoya pearls. So these are very special pearls, but you can see they're quite uniform all the way through with that pink blush. So with this kind of strand, I could just take them off one at a time and strand them together. If you have a colour graduated strand, say this, like this one that I've already knotted up, you can see that they're going from the white to the lilac to the peach. You may want to keep that design, or you may want to ombre them in a different direction. So again, just making sure that you sort of like plan what you're going to make as you are taking them off, so that you don't have like blocks of colour together if you didn't want a random design, if you wanted it to follow the suit all the way through. So you can see we've got white, lilac, peach, white, lilac, peach. And the other thing as well is if you have a graduated coloured strand, so here we can see we're graduating from the whites to the peaches, to the oranges, to the pinks, to the lilacs, and to the really dark sort of like metallic heathers in the center. So again, if that's the case, then we need to lay them out in that kind of order. So just get used to looking at your pearls and seeing which ones you want at the front and which ones you want maybe towards the back. So the next thing that we're going to look at is what kind of pearls we have and how the knots can change. So this is a strand that I have double knotted, and we can see that the knots are very small. So a double knot strand is also called a baroque knot, and it's mainly designed for pearls that aren't completely uniform. So like the one that we've done here, you can see that all of our beautiful pearl nuggets are all different shapes and sizes, and our knot is sitting quite neatly in between them all. If we go into the knotting that we're doing with the awl and with the tweezers, and they're perfectly round pearls, that creates a slightly bigger knot. So just having a look at the kind of the shape of the pearls, the size of the pearls, what kind of knot you want in between them. But to start with, while you're learning, just get used to one of these techniques, or try them all and find one that you like, because it doesn't matter how big the knot is in between or which technique you've used, you're still going to create the same end result of a beautiful pearl knotted piece. So to get your thread in how to start being able to use it, what we want to do is take it out of the packet that it comes in, and we need to take off the whole 2 meters of our card. And I'm just going to zoom you out so you're not so close, you can see a little bit more. There we go. So I'm going to take off the whole 2 meters. Now what we don't want to do is say, okay, so Fleur says I need double the amount for the length that I'm using. So okay, so if I take double of my 8 inches, take off 16 inches and cut it here, all of this cord can't be used because it doesn't have a needle attached to it. So take off all of your cord, and we use right from the very start. Okay, so we use right at the opposite end of the needle to start with. Now keep hold of your card, because if you have any left, you can place it back on the card and you can see what kind of number it is as well. So you can see we've got our gorgeous thread here, already de-stranded. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start my first one with the knotting awl. Now this is probably one that people may struggle with a little bit. It depends on how dexterous you are. This is one that I learnt with, so for me it's the easiest one, but it's only because the one that I learnt with. So we're going to do the knotting awl to start with, and we're going to use our culotte as well. So the first thing we want to do is we want to take the end of our cord, and we're going to tie a knot right in the end. Okay, so I'm going to place a knot, a double knot, right at the very end. So they're just overhand knots, and I'm just going to place a double knot over the end, so that I've now got a knot right in the very end. So it's just like you were tying a normal knot. And then what I'm going to do is look at my culotte. So I need my culotte, if I just zoom in, you can see a little bit easier. I need my culotte to sit this way round. Okay, so I need it to sit so the knot goes in the middle. So I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go down through the little hole that's in between the 2 sides of the culotte. So there is a little hole there which you can then place your needle through. You can see that, okay, yeah. And you're going to bring that all the way down until it gets to the end, and our little knot can sit in the end of that culotte. Let's just get you to focus. There we go. So ignore that little tail end there at the moment, but you can see that our little knot is inside of my culotte there. So what we can do now is we can actually pop a little bit of glue onto this knot, and then we can close this culotte up and cut this little tail end away. So with the glue that you're using, we never use a super glue with any kinds of threads and cords because it can go brittle over time and snap. The best glues to use are something like your Hypo Cement, which is my preferred one because you've got a precision applicator. You can use something like your Zap Gel as well, which is again a flexible glue, or something like your E6000. But this is, for me, the best one to use because I'll show you, when we take off the lid, you have got a really, really fine applicator, which has a pin that, as you can see, goes back into the glue, which means that it doesn't dry out at all and it keeps it nice and fresh for next time. Now, what you do need to make sure when you're using GS Hypo Cement is that you do just clean off the needle every time you sort of like do it back up. Just get a little bit of kitchen towel and just wipe it off, because what we don't want is we don't want the lid to be able to glue back onto there. So taking my Hypo Cement, I'm just going to dab a little bit of glue onto my knot. Now, this is just to make sure that the knot doesn't come undone and then work itself loose out of the culotte. So I'm just going to leave that there for a second just to dry, and I'm just going to place my lid back onto my glue. And the easiest way that I find to do this is to place it over your finger and then just place it over your finger and then just place the pin back in. Just give that a little wipe off, and then we can then go back to our knot. So we would want this to dry before we cut it. Anything that's wet, like any fabric that's wet, is a little bit more, the fabric, the fibres become a lot looser, and what can happen is it can undo the knot as it's loose. We want this to dry before we move on. So I'm just going to let this dry, and I'll meet you back here when I'm ready to move on to the next stage. So my glue is nice and dry now, so I can now take my cord scissors and I can just trim the end of my thread away so that it's not sticking out when I close the culotte. So I've now got my knot on the end, and I'm going to bring that and settle that into the cup of the culotte. And now holding it nice and tight, so I'm just pinching it between my thumb and my first finger just so that the knot stays right down in there. I'm just going to take now my 0 4-in-1 crimping pliers, and I'm just going to gently and slowly just start to close the culotte up, and it's just like a little hinge at the bottom, so you just tiny little movements. Try not to do it all in one go because that will flatten your lovely bead shape. We want to keep it nice and rounded. And then what you can also do as well is just go towards the bottom, and where your little hinges are, just give them a little squeeze just to really close the culotte nice and tight. So I'm just going in and just squeezing down onto those, and there you can see now that the knot is now completely hidden within that lovely culotte, and we've got this hook which we can use here to then attach straight into our finding if we want. So you can add that straight away, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add on a jump ring so that I can then add that to a clasp at some point. So with your jump rings, if they're open, just give them a little close. Make sure that they're nicely closed together. So using 2 pairs of pliers, you're just gonna give that a little close. and then hooking that over the end of the hook. We can then take our round nose pliers and just encourage the loop of the hook. Just encourage that little hook. Let me see if I can get you to focus. There we go. Just encourage that hook down towards the culotte so that it's encapsulated the jump ring inside. I'll just lift that so you can see. So you can see now that that's now enclosed in there, and now we're ready to start our knotting. So I'm just going to move all the tools out of the way. Now when we're knotting, we do need to make sure that everything that we're using is completely out of the way. We don't want anything that's going to catch on our strand that we're knotting with. So if you just move all sort of like any bits out of the way that it can get caught on, because we've got 2 meters of cord to work with. It is a lot of cord when you're first starting to sort of like manage. So I'm just going to move those out of the way. I've got my pearls ready, so if I just get a little tray and pop some pearls in here ready to knot with. So again, everything's in sort of like quite a handy distance away. So the first thing that we're going to do is, like I said, we're going to be using our knotting awl. So this is where we're going to definitely use our EVA board for our knotting awl. So the first thing we need to add a pearl onto our cord. So using the needle, taking the needle through the drill hole of the pearl. Now sometimes if the pearl has got a little bit of pearl dust inside, it may be that the needle doesn't want to go through. So in that case, you can use something like a little piece of wire or a head pin just to go through and just get that pearl dust moved, and then it will go through nicely. So we've got our first pearl in place. And what we're going to do now is we're going to form our knot. So I'm just going to zoom you out so you can see most of my hand. I'm going to place the pearl and the knot in the palm of my hand, the pearl and the ending in the palm of my hand, and I'm going to bring the cord all the way round the palm of my hand or my fingers till it gets to the top, and I'm going to cross it over and place my thumb over that cross. So you can see the cross there, place my thumb across. The working strand that I'm working with is at the back, and it's come around the front of my hand. I'm then going to just go underneath that loop, which is around my hand, pick up the working strand and bring it all the way through. Now if you're working with silk, just be very careful that you don't get it knotted at this point. And I'm going to take it off of my hand and lay it onto the board with the cross of the knot at the top and the loop at the bottom. Let's just zoom you in so you can see that. So I'm just going to bring the pearl onto there. So they've got, when I took it off my hand, this is where my hand was. This was the cross at the top, and this is the loop that went around my hand, and we've just gone underneath to create just a normal overhand knot. Now you can just do a very small overhand knot, but the difference with that is if it fell off the desk or got caught on something, that knot would tighten too fast, and then we'd have to try and take the knot out because it's not where we want it to be. So we've got a big knot here, so we've got plenty of scope to sort of like close the knot down and place the knot where we want it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our knotting awl and we're going to place it into the board. Okay, so this is what we're looking like, and I'm going to tighten the knot by pulling. I'll just hold it up so you can see. I'm going to pull the cord until the pearl is sitting against the knotting awl. So you can see there, everything's nice and secured, nothing's going to move. And then what I want to do is I want to make sure that this is nice and tight. So just keeping hold of the thread, I'm just going to push the thread and tighten. So this is now really tight, there's hardly any movement. So if I just loosen it off again, so it's up against the knotting awl, but it's loose. Okay, what I want to do is make sure it's nice and tight. So I'm just pushing up towards the pearl, and now it's a lot tighter. There's no movement on there at all. Okay, so now the next thing we want to do is we're going to add on another pearl. So I'll just move that so you can see. This is the pearl, my knotting awl, and then taking my needle, I'm going to take another pearl, and this is what's going to push the knot together. Place the other pearl onto the needle, bring it all the way down so it's sitting next to the knotting awl on the other side of the knotting awl. So we've got the pearl, the knot, and another pearl. And then placing my hand over the top of both of those pearls, I'm going to just remove the knotting awl. Okay, so it just comes straight out of the board, and I'm going to place it down to the side. Now if I just move that away, we can still see that we have the pearl, the knot, and the pearl that we've just added. So the knot is still sitting close to the first pearl. It's not come anywhere near the second pearl. So what we can do then is just using our thumb and our first finger from either hand. So our non-dominant hand is holding the original pearl, and our dominant hand is going to have the cord just go over the last three fingers. So your middle finger to your little finger. And then we're going to just use our thumb and our first finger to push those pearls together. Now, let me just zoom right in for you, just so you can see. There we go. So we don't want any gap between these pearls, okay? If you leave a gap, that's where the knot will form in the gap and it won't be nice and tight. So pushing the pearls together, I'm just using my middle finger just to eke that cord a little bit tighter. So I'm pushing and just pulling, and then if we just lift that up now, oops, there we go. You can see that knot's nice and small now, so it's a lot smaller. It stayed next to the pearl, the original pearl, and then what we can do is just using our thumb and our first finger, we can just give the pearl a little push, and if I just pull the other pearl away, you can see that that knot is really close to the pearl without any gap between it, and that's what we want. We don't want no gaps between our pearls. If there's gaps between our pearls, then it's going to look like it's stretched a little bit. So the aim of the game is to try and get your knots as close to your pearl as possible. So that pearl now has got no movement on it, so I'm wiggling it, there's no movement, and the knot is there. Now you can always just push the pearl down onto this second pearl onto that knot just to really tighten it up. And now we're back to adding our next knot. So again, pearls in the palm of your hand, cord all the way round, cross at the top, place your thumb over, and then bring the cord underneath and through, lay it down on the board, making sure that the loop is at the bottom and the cross is at the top. Okay, so we can see there the cross is at the top, the loop's at the bottom. Placing our knotting awl, tighten the loop, pull the pearls so that they're now sitting next to the knotting awl on my non-dominant side. Just give that a little pull just to really tighten that cord up, and then let me just move it to the side so you can see. So if I just leave that there, and then we're going to take our next pearl and place that on, and bring that all the way down till it reaches the other side. Placing my hand over the top of those pearls just so that nothing moves. Take the knotting awl out, place it down on the side, and again we can see, if I just pull that pearl away, that the knot is still close to the second pearl this time, not close to this loose pearl that we've just added. We want the knot to stay where it is. Now, if I was to just pull this cord, the knot would travel up the cord away from this pearl. So that's why we need to push them together so there's no gaps at all. So the cord can't go, the knot can't go anywhere other than next to the pearl that's in my non-dominant hand. Just eke the cord through a little bit so the knot is smaller, and then give it a final little push down, and there we've got our second knot in place. So you can see that the knot is really close. We've got no gap between the pearl and the knot, and we can always, like I say, use the pearl just to really push that knot down. I'm going to do one more with you. So again, pearls in the palm of your hand, cord around, make a cross at the top, thumb over the cross, bringing the cord through, laying that down on the board. So the loop is at the top. I'm just placing the pearls there just so you can see them. The loop's at the bottom, the cross is at the top, knotting all in. And I'm just going to zoom out a little bit just so you can maybe see a little bit better when I pull that close. So I'm just pull the cord until the pearls sit on the non-dominant side and they're nice and close, but then just to really tighten, we're just going to ratchet that cord up. Now, if you're using your silk, obviously you just be a little bit more careful because it's not as robust as the power nylon. So just a little bit more kid gloves when you're using the silk. Taking the needle, I'm now going to place on my next pearl onto the needle, bringing that down. Make sure it's nice and up close. Hand over all of the pearls, or especially the one that we've just added and the very last pearl that we're knotted. Check that the knot is where we want it. So if I just pull that pearl away, we can see it's still there, nice and close. Cord over the last 3 fingers, using your thumb and your first fingers to push the pearls together so there's no gap. And as you can see, I'm just pulling the cord with my last 3 fingers just to start to tighten the knot. So the knot's now a lot tighter, and then I can just pick it up and push the pearl down onto the knot to finally close that knot up. So there we go. So we've now got our pearls all knotted beautifully, and you would carry on knotting until you got to the end of your project. Never knot the last pearl in place, because what I'm going to show you now is how you're going to then attach the other side of the clasp. So imagine we've got a full necklace of pearls or a full bracelet of pearls, and we're just going to now add on our last ending. So we have to replicate what we did on one end onto the other. So this time we want the culotte to be facing outwards. So we want our culotte to be facing outwards. So we're going to come through the bottom this time of our culotte out towards the hook. So taking your needle, and like I say, we didn't have a knot between the first pearl and the culotte, so we're not going to put a knot in between the last pearl and the culotte. So up through the middle of the needle, bringing that all the way down, making sure that we don't get any knots in our cord. Let that go all the way down to the bottom till it's like so. So like I say, this is a very, very short piece. You would have a long piece, so you'd have the piece that was like the finished length. And then we're going to tie again an overhand knot, and this time we want to try and encourage that knot to go right into the bottom of the culotte. So if we just bring that to there, let's just place our knotting awl in like we did before, bring that all the way down, making sure that there is no gaps, so really pulling that quite tight, making sure that there's no gaps in between the knot that's going to sit into your knotting awl, that's going to sit into your culotte. Okay, and I'm just going to take that out, and I'm just going to then, you could, if you've got a spare pearl, you can obviously use that, or you could use something like a bead to help push that knot down, just to really fasten that knot down into your culotte, and we can just take it off once we've finished. So if we just bring that down, and we'll just really push, make sure that the knot, so I'm just using the pearl just to make sure that the knot doesn't come up away from where it wants to be, and then we can remove the pearl. If you want to, you could use something like your tweezers as well, just to really get that knot down into the actual piece itself, so that the knot now is inside. And what we're going to do is repeat what we did on the other side. So a little dab of glue, you could put another knot in there if you wanted to, another dab of glue, and then just closing up your culotte exactly the same as what we did with on the first one, with your either your chain nose or your sort of like crimping pliers. Can't remember the word for them there. Crimping pliers. So you can do that. So I'm just going to go ahead and just add another knot in here, and then put a dab of glue, and I'll meet you back here when I'm ready just to close that up. So I've gone ahead and just trimmed off the end of the cord and closed the culotte up and added just another jump ring. So this could either be a little section for in a necklace or bracelet, or it could be that you've done the whole length of your piece and this is how it's going to be finished off. And then all that's left to do then is just to attach a clasp into one of the jump rings. Now, like I say, I always like to go to a jump ring rather than straight onto the clasp, because then if somebody says that they don't like this clasp for any reason, if you're if you're selling or gifting that piece, then you can quickly change the clasp, because all you're doing is change, you can just open and close the jump ring to then add it in. So that is your first technique of using the knotting awl. So the second technique we're going to do is using our tweezers. So it's the same kind of knot, everything's the same, apart from how we push the knot down, if you like, so how we sort of like close the knot up. So I'm just going to get myself some pearls, and I've got my cord, and this time we're going to use our wire guardians. So those are the little horseshoe shapes that we said about to start with, that I've got the little groove around the top and the beading holes, or the two holes at the bottom to pop your needle up through. Now with this one we are going to use a crimp and a bead as well, so a crimp cover and a bead. So if I just bring those over, so this is what we're going to use for this technique. So these are the three little elements that we're going to use, and obviously again we can then add in a jump ring as we want over the top. I'm not going to put that on at the moment. So taking our cord again, so if we bring in our cord, so we can see we've still got lots and lots left, even because we only just did that little tiny bit. The first thing we want to do is just to make sure, so if you're using cord that you've used before in a different project, just make sure that there's no fraying, too much fraying between the cord and the needle, just that we don't want that to come off halfway through. So just make sure that that's nicely secured, which it is. And what we're going to do is we're going to add on, to start with, our little 3mm bead. So we're just going to bring the needle onto there, and we're going to bring that down till it's really close to the end of our thread. So bringing that all the way down, until it's sitting just a couple of inches away from the end of our thread. And then taking our wire guardian, we're going to go up through one side of the wire guardian. So I'll just place the needle in so you can see. So I've just gone up through one side. See if we can get you to focus. Come on. There we go. So we've just gone up through one side. I'll just flip it over just so you can see. It makes more sense when it's flipped over, that you can see where the path's going to go. So we've gone up through this side which is closest to me, and then I'm going to come down through the other side. So we can see how the needles come up through the side that's closest and down through the side which is the furthest away. And like I say, it's gone through those two little channels, the little holes at the bottom. And I'm going to then just bring this down to meet the bead. Now, if we wanted to add a clasp onto this now, we'd have to do this at this point, because in a minute we're going to close it up. But if we're just using a jump ring, then we don't have to do it straight away, because we can sort of like open the jump ring around it and just close it onto there. So I'm just going to get hold of the end where the bead is. Don't let the bead fall off the other end. There we go. And I'm just bringing that all the way through. So just taking all this cord through. Just take your time. Make sure it doesn't get knotted up as it goes. And if it does, just sort of like spend a few minutes just to untangle it all, because we don't want any knots in our cord. We want it to flow freely down to the end. I'm just going to undo that little, and cord will do this, especially silk. Silk loves to knot itself together. So I'm just bringing it all the way down, just taking one side through. So I've still got hold of the end of my thread here, just bringing that all the way down. We need to leave a couple of inches on the end, and then I'm just holding. Just going to put my finger over the top of everything and then just bring the long strand through. And then I need to take the needle and go back through the bead which is there. So take the end of the needle and I'm going to go back through the bead towards the tail end of the cord. So just pick up the bead and go through there with the needle, and then pull your cord through, so that now your wire guardian and your bead are sitting next to each other. Okay, so we can see there the wire guardian with the thread going around the top and the bead. Now what we can do at this point is we can take our chain nose or flat nose pliers and we can just give it a very gentle squeeze together. And what that's doing is it's just making the ends of the wire guardian just come a little bit closer, so it doesn't look as clunky. It looks a lot more streamlined going down towards the bead. Now these aren't crimps, so you don't need to crimp them at the end. We just want to bring it a little bit closer. If I just bring one over that hasn't been moved, you'll be able to see the difference. So you can see how wide the one in my pliers is and how we've got that one to come in nicely together, so it's more of just a hoop at the top. So don't leave them wide like this, just give them a little tiny encouragement just to go a little bit closer together so that we get that nice look. And now we've got two ends of our cord. So if I just bring that down, And now what we're going to do is just do an overhand knot, the same but with the 2 cords. It's almost like a surgeon's knot if you've ever if you know how to do a surgeon's knot. So you're going to go round once and round twice and pull tight, and then we're going to do exactly the same again. So round once and round twice, and this is a really nice secure knot. This isn't going to go anywhere. And pull down. So now our finding is knotted onto our cord. Like I say, we can always just add our jump ring through the loop there, and now we're ready to glue that knot and get started with our tweezer knotting. So we've got our knot in place now, and all we need to do now is just to add a little dab of glue onto the knot. Now, because we're going to cut the tail end of the thread off as well, it makes it easier if you just add a little bit of glue up the tail end, because then when this dries, it's going to dry nice and solid and be easier for us to cut off. And it's also a great way of getting rid of the last little bit of glue that's on your needle. So we're just going to put the lid back in there, and then we're going to let this dry for a couple of minutes. So I've just used the hypo cement glue as you saw, but like I say, as in the others, you could use a Zap jewellery glue or the E6000 glue, and just use a little piece of wire or a head pin just to get the glue where you want it to go, so it's a bit more precision. So we're going to let this dry, and then once it's dry, we're going to cut the tail end off, and then it's time to put the crimp cover on. So I've gone ahead and I've cut the little tail end of cord off, so all that's left now is our knot. And then taking our crimp cover, we're just going to place that over the very top of the knot, making sure that we've got all the little ends inside the crimp cover. So as you can see, it's like a little open 3/4 bead, like a little Pac-Man, and everything goes inside there. And then using something like your crimping pliers or your flat nose pliers, we're just going to start to encourage the ends of the crimp cover around to make a full bead. Now again, like with the culottes, you're going to take your time, making sure that you do slow little movements until it's completely enclosed around there and looking really nice and neat. So we now have our 2 beads that are going to start our knotting. So just making sure, so if there's a little bit sticking out, just go through, and you can either, with your knotting awl, just try and push it down into the crimp, or you can just use your cutters just to cut that little section away. Just cut that away and make sure that everything's nice and neat. Just take your time with this bit, just for pure demo purposes. I'm going to leave it at that, but I would make sure that I've got rid of all that little bit that's there, either with my thread zapper, my cutters, or just poking it back down inside of my crimp. So we're going to do this technique with our tweezers. So it's exactly the same as what we did before, as in the way that the knot is formed, but it's just very, very slightly different how we push the knot down. Now, when we were talking about our tools, we were talking about how smooth your knotting pliers have to be on the inside. Okay, and now this is because we don't want to catch any of the filaments of our cord, and it would start to fray and then obviously snap eventually. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take one of our pearls, and we're just going to place that onto the needle and bring that all the way down till it reaches your first bead. And then exactly the same as before, we're going to form our knot. So around your hand, cross, thumb over the top, bring it through, and there we've got our knot exactly the same. So you can see we've got our loop and our knot. Now this time what we're going to do is take hold of our tweezers. We're going to place our tweezers through the loop, so it's going through that loop, and we're going to hold onto the top of the pearl. So the loop is around the tweezers and we're holding onto the top of that pearl. Now what we want to do is we want to tighten, pull the working strand to tighten that knot, and we're going to actually knot it onto the top of the tweezers. So you can see the tweezers are now knotted in place over the top. Okay, so it's almost a bit like the knotting awl to start with, but this time it's up in the air away from the board. So we've got our tweezers in there completely knotted closed. So we're going to take the tweezers out, and we can see that the knot is very close to the pearl. And what we're going to do is we're going to put the tweezers on top of the knot, and we're going to pull the cord to tighten the knot. Now what we're not going to do is we're not going to run our tweezers up and down the cord, because again, if this catches, that could actually start to rip the cord, and that's our first knot in place. So we're going to take our needle again, and we're going to do a second pearl and place a second pearl on. Bring that all the way down. So we've got our second pearl in place, and again, as before, you can give that a little push. Let's just get you to focus. You can give that pearl a little push, but we can see there that the knot is sitting perfectly there. So again, we're going to go around our hand, cross at the top, bring the cord from the back to the front, all the way through. So we've got our loop, the cross is at the top, loop here, take our tweezers, and we're going to go through the loop and hold the top of the pearl, no gap, right on top of the pearl, holding on to the top of the pearl there, and then start to slowly tighten the cord around. So we've knotted our tweezers in place on top of the pearl, resting everything on the pad of your finger. We're going to just take out the tweezers. Don't let this fall, because that will then tighten that knot. So we're take out our tweezers, and then we're going to place our tweezers back in on top of the knot so that there's not much room over the top, and we're going to pull the cord upwards, and you'll see that you'll put a lot of tension on here, and that's going to then tighten the knot. And there we've got our second knot in place with no movement on those pearls, no gaps at all. So we're going to do one more. So again, taking your pearl, place it on all the way down to the bottom. So your pearl is in place, around your hand, cross at the top, thumb over, bring the strand through. So you've got your loop and your cross here. So through the loop and hold the top of the pearl, and then just gently, slowly tighten that loop over the top, tighten the knot over the top of the tweezers so they're not going anywhere. Rest them on the pad of your finger, take your tweezers out, tweezers back in, so it's on top of the knot, and we pull the cord, we don't move the tweezers. Pull the cord, tweezers stay still, but that's just pushing that knot down, and there we've got our next knot. So this one is a lot faster. This is a quicker way of pearl knotting. And once you get into the swing of it, you'll soon whiz your way through one of your necklaces or your bracelets. Again, bringing that down. You can always use that last pearl just to push again, just so that it's really tightening that last knot. And one more around and through, picking up your tweezers through the loop onto the top of the pearl, bringing it down, pull it nice and tight, rest it on the pad, tweezers out and then back in, and then just pull the cord whilst putting downwards pressure onto your tweezers, and there you've got your next one in place. Let's just see if we can get you to focus. Come on, camera. Just see if I can get it to focus for you. There we go. So you can see there we've got these lovely knots now in between. None of the pearls are moving. They're all nicely tightly next to the knot that's previous and the knot in front of it. You can see there we've got a really nice start of a bracelet or a necklace. Now to finish this one off, it's slightly different. Because with the culottes we could just hide the last knot inside. With this one, what we do is we place on our last pearl. So if we imagine we've done the whole necklace, our last pearl, and we don't put a knot here. Okay, so this one is just loose, so we don't knot on the end. And what we then want to do is take one of our silver beads, our 3mm beads, and we're going to go through and place that on and bring that all the way down. Of course, just tuck around my table. So we've got our silver bead, our pearl and our silver bead, and then we're going to take our wire guardian, and again exactly the same as before, we're going to go up one side, up one side of our wire guardian with the needle, and then we're going to go back down the other side like before, remembering that if we want to add a clasp or something directly onto here, that we need to add it on before we go through the bead. If not, you can just carry on using your jump rings, and then taking our needle, so we've gone all the way round, so we can see here we've got our cord and our wire guardian, and then we're going to go back through the bead towards the pearls that we've just knotted in place. Let's bring that all the way down. So make sure that we don't get it all tangled up. We want to make sure that it's nicely running through everything, that it's not going to knot somewhere where we don't want a knot. So I'm going to bring the rest of the cord down now, so it's sitting inside the groove around the wire guardian. Now what we're looking for is we need a tiny little gap here, because this is where we're going to place our last knot. But what we want to make sure is that we've got everything down to where it needs to be. So we don't want to place this knot in if we've got a big gap at the top. So the first thing I want to do is just nip this wire guardian together like we did before. So just give it a gentle squeeze together. Try not to do it in one big movement, lots of little movements, just so it's a lot neater to look at. And this will be a lot easier when you've got it close to your face rather than at arm's length trying to demo it. So we're just going to give it a little squeeze just to encourage it down to where we want it to go. And so then we've got this tiny little gap here where we can fit our knot and also our crimp cover. So if things just start moving around, just pop your tweezers into where you want it to be. But just remember that we've got to place our crimp cover in the gap as well. So just make sure you've got enough space in there for a 3mm crimp cover. You'll be able to see it by eye. Now what we want to do is now we've got that little gap, what we want to do now is we want to cut away our working strand, okay? Now you can do a knot, keeping it all in one go by making it into a loop and then bringing it around and going through. But for me, it's never a strong knot, so I like to do it this way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my cord. So I've got about 3 inches of cord away. And then the best thing about all of your silks and your power nylons is it's twined together. So when I just undo, if I just rub it in my fingers at the end, you'll see it goes into 2 separate cords. So you can see there it started to split and it's gone into 2 separate cords. What we want to do is we want to just unravel this all the way down. So take it all the way down until you've got 1 cord on one side and 1 cord on the other, and then you can just do some knots, some simple knots into the gap. So 1 knot and 2. So you can put like 3 or 4 knots into this little gap. Don't forget this is going to get covered up by the crimp cover anyway, so I've just turned it over just so I've got my space in the same. Little squeeze, making sure that that's nice and tight. And then what we would do now is we would glue these two, glue this little knot, glue up the ends, and then taking your crimp cover, you can then place the crimp cover over the top. And sometimes with crimp covers you just have to be a little bit patient because they can be a little bit temperamental and not want to be where you want them to be. So you just have to take your time making sure that the crimp cover is over the top of that knot. We're just going to squeeze that in place. So you're going to slide it over the top of that final knot that we've just made. Like I say, it does fit in there if you've left a big enough gap, so you can see it's nicely in there. Well, it was till it fell out, but you get the drift. So you can pop it back in. Let's just get that back over the top. By this point, your glue's already dried. Wait, I haven't put any glue on this because it's just for demo. So you can see it's just gone back over the top there. And then what you would do is just cut your 2 strands away after your glue's dried, place on your crimp. I'll just cut those away quickly just so you can't, they're not in your way to see. And then you close that crimp up, and there you've got how you would make your ends with your wire guardians. Now while we've just got this here, if you're working with power nylon, not with your silk, you can use your burner for this. So you can, if you want to, just take your thread zapper and just thread zapper these down. If you want to, just be careful that you don't burn your pearls when you're doing that. Or like I say, you can take a little bit of glue and then just let that dry and then just trim all these little ends, the little flyaways away, because they will all fit inside your crimp cover anyway. And that's how you finish your fabulous wire guardians. So our final technique that we're going to do is our double-stranded technique. So it's where the strands go through the pearls twice. So we do need to make sure that our cord can go through our pearls twice easily. So in this technique, I tend to use the number 2 card. It's a lot finer and it does facilitate the pearl going through the pearls twice. Now it does say 0.45, so if you know that from wire, obviously that doubles up to a 0.9, but because wire is rigid and this is can be like condensed, if you like, within inside the pearl, it does go through twice. But an easy way to check is if you just unhook the needle from the back and then just take your needle and the first little bit off of the card. If you get one of your pearls and you place it onto the needle. Now you will find that the needle is a lot finer on this one because obviously the cord is a lot finer. If you take it through and then just take the needle back through, so the pearls on the cord, if you just quickly take it back through and it goes through easily, you can see there. So that's 2 lots of cord going through. We know that this will work perfectly fine for this technique. So you can see there you've got both of them coming out the bottom. So we know that that works for this size pearl. So it's always handy just to check before you start that it will work perfectly. So we're going to use the French wire with this. Now French wire also is known as GIMP as well. And what it is if you're used to any wire wrapping or using wire, it's like a little gizmo coil of wire. So if I just take a little bit and I'll just pull it apart just to show you what I mean. Let me get that to focus. So if you can see, I'll just, don't stretch yours because it won't be able to be used once it's stretched. But you can see there, it's like a little coil of wire. So obviously it won't go back again. So if you try not to uncoil it, because it won't be any good for your pearl knotting pieces, but I'll just chop that bit off. But it was just to show you what it looks like. And it's just a coil. So what we want is 2 little bits of about 1 centimetre each. So what I tend to do is use either scissors or cord pliers, so cord scissors, cord and thread pliers, rather than your flush cutters, because you'll get a nice, easier, cleaner cut. With flush cutters, what can happen is it can destroy the very first coil. It makes it a bit difficult to work with. So either a pair of scissors or something like these Xeon cord cutters. And then what I do is I just line that up and I just cut exactly the same and just make sure that both pieces are the same length, because obviously it's going to alter how it looks as a piece if they are different lengths. So I've got my 2 pieces of French wire here. Now the easiest way is to leave them on the board and put them on the needle like that when we get to that. And we're also going to have 2 jump rings so that we can attach our clasp onto that when we get to it. So the first thing we want to do is, if I just move this out of the way, the first thing we want to do is we want to take off all of our thread, all of our 2 meters of thread off of our card. So we'll just unwrap the whole 2 meters. Now because this is a double strand, what you are it's going to take a lot more cord. So one sort of like 20-inch necklace, well, you can get about a 25-inch necklace from 1 2-meter cord, but you are going to use double the amount that you need. So and then a little bit more on top of that for the knots. So just bear that in mind. I always, if I'm going to do a necklace of double stranding, always get a fresh card so that I know that I've got enough on there. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to find the end and either place a knot in it or pop on your bead stopper. So I'm just going to get my bead stopper, do a little boingy spring and just place that on the end so that none of the pearls fall off, because what we want to do is we want to now add our pearls onto our cord in the order that we want them to be. So if you've got a specific design, then that's how you're going to add them onto your cord. But I'm just going to take my tray of pearls here, and I'm just going to add on a few of them. So I'm just going to only add on a few. You would do the whole project, but you're always going to leave the very last pearl off of the cord. So once you've finished stranding all your pearls, you should have one left over at the end. So just make sure that you always have that one left over to facilitate putting the clasp on. So just take your time. This, like I say, this needle is a lot thinner and a lot more bendier. Now, if you are using your needles of any size cord and the end bit is really sort of like not helpful and it's got like a kink in it or it's bent, you can trim it down. So don't be afraid just to trim the end of your needle away if you need to. That's why it's so long, that you can then trim that away. So if I've just put a few pearls on, but like I say, you'll do the whole lot. So I've just got a few on there, and then I'll just leave one that I'm going to use at the end. So that's my final pearl there. And I'm going to let those go all the way down to the bottom, or nearly to the bottom. And I'm going to leave, so I need to leave about half the length that I'm working with at the end. So we never let these pearls go right to the very end of our cord, because we are going to need this cord to facilitate the knots as well. So we have just half of that length, so that's a bit too much, but we always leave half the length of cord at the bottom so that we can use it for the knots in the piece. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to pick up our piece of French wire. So just place that through, and you see it was just quite easy to pick it up off of the mat. Easier to pick it up off the mat than to try and hold it and add it onto the needle. So that's onto the needle now, and let that go all the way down. And now I tend to hold this in my hand as I'm bringing it down, just lightly, so that it doesn't get caught on anything, because again, if it pulls, it's going to stretch that coil out. So bring that all the way down till it meets the first pearl. And now we're going to take one of our jump rings, and we're going to place that onto the needle. So the jump ring's now on the needle, and we're going to let that come all the way down. Bring that all the way down to the end. That's it. And again, making sure that we've got that safety piece of cord here where the knots are going to be. So just leaving that little bit. And then I'm going to come through, back through my very first pearl. So taking the needle through the first pearl, making sure that the needle doesn't pierce the thread as you're putting it through. So just be very careful that you don't go through the thread. So it's just going to go by the side, through that pearl, and bringing that down. And I'm keeping hold of the pearl, bringing the cord all the way through. And then what will happen with that French wire is, where we've used the wire guardian, which is a solid piece of metal, if you like, to guide and to protect the thread, and we've used the culotte to hide the first knot and encapsulate all the workings of holding the finding in place. This little bit of French wire is going to bend over into like a horseshoe shape. If I just lift it up, and you'll be able to see. I'm just move that one out of the way so it doesn't. So if I just keep that there, if you can see, as soon as I start to pull the cord smaller, what will happen is that little piece of French wire, let's just get you to focus, that little piece of French wire is going to bend over into that little horseshoe shape, and there you can see we've got our French wire with our jump ring attached into there, sitting on top of our first pearl. So that's now encapsulated in there, so we can then put our finding on here, and we've got our thread protected by our French wire, and we've got our thread coming through our first pearl. Now with this technique, it's very, very simple, because all we're doing is simple knots to tie them in place. So where we've got our end with our pearls on it, so this is our end with the pearls already there, and this is the end with the needle on. All I'm going to do is take both of my ends and I'm going to just tie them in a knot. So like you would your shoelaces. Tie them in a knot, lay it down, and then you're just going to pull that knot tight. Now, sometimes that knot is too small, so we can see, let me just get that to focus for you. So it's quite a small knot, really, really small. You can leave it with a single knot, but I like to do a double knot over the top just to make it more of a feature and to make it more secure. So then bringing that down and just a double knot. So the difference with this kind of knot to the other kinds of knot, if I just show you like that, can you see that this knot is flat to the bottom of the pearl, whereas these knots are long ways to the pearl. So how we, so if I just sit it like that, you should be able to see the difference. So this knot creates a bigger gap between both of the pearls, and this knot that we're just doing now creates a smaller gap between the bottom of the pearl, between the top and the bottom of the pearls. Now this knot is called a baroque knot, which means that because your pearls aren't perfectly round, being baroques, that means that it doesn't matter the size of the pearl and how round that knot is, because it's only there to separate the pearls rather than to be a feature knot. So these round knots here work beautifully with round pearls because it then showcases how round the pearls are. So if I just show you with this one, you can see there we've got those beautiful round knots in between, and it showcases those beautiful pearls. Whereas with the baroque knots, it doesn't matter if they're not perfectly round, but all three ways work for all shapes of pearls. So it's just like I said before, it's whichever one resonates with you the most. So we're now going to take our needle and our next pearl, and we're going to go down through the next pearl. Now if you're only doing a single knot, or you've noticed that this knot's worked itself loose, before you pull your knot, before you put your pearl in place, and I'll just show you, I'll just get the rest of this through. Before we go any further, what you can do is go back and just tighten that knot, and then using both of your strands, we're going to just push the next pearl up. Now what you do have to be careful of is that you don't leave a loop of thread, that you have pulled both of your pearls up. Now the other thing to note is that this cord obviously is a lot thinner, and if you're using silk, it'll be a little bit more fragile, so don't go all Hulk Hogan on it and pull it really, really tight, because you could snap your silk. It's very difficult to snap power nylon, but it's a very, very strong material, so you can give it a little bit more of a pull, but just make sure that everything's sitting where you want it to sit before you put your next bead where you want it. So my next bead is in, and again I'm going to do my overhand knot. So there's one, pulling it nice and tight, and I'm just going to do another one over the top because I quite like the juxtaposition of the black cord against the beautiful shiny white pearls. So I've got my second knot in place, and I'm going to go through again, through to the next one, making sure that I don't pierce the cord as it comes through, that it comes side by side through, bringing it all the way through. And when you first start, obviously you've got 2 meters of cord to deal with, so it can be a little bit daunting. Just take your time, make sure that you've got everything where you want it to be before you start to do your knots. And pull, and again pulling that knot. So you can start to see now we've got these lovely knots sitting in between our pearls. I'm just going to do these last 4 and I'll meet you back here when I've just about to finish, and I'll show you how you finish off this style of knotting. So I've knotted the next few in place. Now this very last one that's on the actual cord that we've added to start with, we don't knot this one in place. So we leave that one without a knot. And remember we had the spare pearl as well. So what we're going to do to finish off this piece is take our spare pearl and we're going to go through that onto the needle and let that go all the way down just onto the single cord. So that's just a single cord that's gone through like so. So we've got no knot here. We've got our single pearl that we kept back, and then we're going to take our French wire and we're going to go through the French wire with our needle. So that's now on there, all the way down. And before we go back through that pearl, we're going to remember to place on our closed jump ring. So there's the jump ring. And now remember when we were doing the wire guardian, we needed 2 pieces of cord to be able to finish that piece off. So this is going to facilitate those 2 pieces of cord. So we've got one piece here, which is coming out in between the last pearl that was on the original cord and this loose pearl that we've just added. Then we've got our French wire and our jump ring, and we're going to go back down through the pearl towards the piece that we've just knotted. So we're going to bring the needle back down now, all the way through, and if it's come away, just bring it back to where, so it's close, and then just hold the 2 pearls in place. So I'm just holding the last 2 pearls in place and just let that come down until you get the French wire to curl over, and then making sure that we've got everything where we want it to be. So we just make sure that everything's looking nice and neat. So we can see there that we've got our loop of French wire with our jump ring on. Like I say, if anything, I've probably used a little bit too much French wire. You could get away with like a little bit less than this. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to cut our cord a couple of inches away. So we cut the needle off. We're going to keep this for another project. We can take the bead stopper off, and we just need to make sure that everything's where we want it. So just keep having a little play, just making sure that you've got no gap at all. So just find the one that's going to tighten everything back up. So there we go. So now we've got no gap between the pearl and the, just bring it down, zoom you in a little bit. So we've got no gap between the pearl and the French wire hoop that we've just made, and we've got a tiny little gap in here that we're going to just tie our knots now, and then just to replicate the last knot and hold both pieces of cord in place. So just making sure you've got a teeny tiny little gap, and then just overhand knots. What I like to do is I like to do one on one side, and then I flip my work over and do one on the other side and tighten, and then flip it back over and one last one on this side. And so we've got the same visual size of knot. So I'm just tying those in place. So visually it's the same size knot that we've had before. So you can see there, it's going to look nice and neat. I mean, if you wanted to, you could go back and place another one in if you wanted that bigger knot look. Pulling it nice and tight. And now all that's left to do now is to take your hyper cement glue and pop a little dab onto the knot and onto the cords that we're going to cut. And I like to glue both sides because you have got knots on both sides. Try not to get the glue onto the pearls, but if you do get glue on the pearl, then it is quite easy just to gently pick it off of the pearl to clean the pearl up, because pearls wouldn't really want the glue all over them if possible. So then once that's dried, you can then trim away your two ends, and all you've got on this then is just your metalwork at the top. There's no crimp covers, there's nothing else in between. You've only got one knot at the very end which is holding everything together, and the cord's gone through twice. So we'll just pretend that that's dry, and I'll just trim these away. This is where really sharp scissors come into their play, especially if they've, like these Xuron cord scissors, they're really great for getting right in. Like I say, you would wait for yours to dry in an ideal world. You just wait for that to dry, and then what I like to do is just to go in with my tweezers and just pinch it all together, just to make sure that everything's where it needs to be. So there we've got our three different kinds of starts and finishes. So we started with our culotte, which is this one, which was that little clamshell finding which holds the knots inside. So we started with that one. Then we went to our wire guardian, which was like our little headphones or horseshoes, and finally to our French wire. Now, whichever technique you want to do, whether that be your knotting or your tweezers or your double-stranded, you can mix and match how these ends work on all of them. So if you wanted to do a double-stranded technique with a culotte, you can do. If you wanted to do a double-stranded technique with your wire guardians, you can do. So it's just finding a way that works for you so that you can create your beautiful knotted pieces of jewellery with all your gorgeous pearls that you bought. So you can create all these pieces really, really beautifully. If you only got a few pearls and you only wanted to do half, don't forget you can use only a small strand of pearls or just a few strands and place it on a chain, so you've just got a small amount of pearls at the top, and then you've got your chain as well. Or you could use macrame or beading, whatever you want, but you can use this technique and whichever endings that you want. In this case, I've got some French wire on this one. You can use whichever endings you want, whichever technique that resonates with you best, to create these wonderful pieces of jewellery that you're going to make. So thank you ever so much for watching. And if you do have any questions, please pop over to relaxandcraft.com or email me info@relaxandcraft.com. And if you're into your jewellery making, why not come and follow me over on Facebook and on Instagram, and it's just the same, Relax and Craft, and we can do some wonderful jewellery making together and maybe open up a world of different techniques and different jewellery mediums. Thank you very much for watching.